Morning. I'd like to call the Kankakee County Board meeting to order for July 13th. Today's invocation is from Dr. Pat Polk.
God of peace, we invite you to preside over this meeting. Even if we have differences of opinion, give us unity of spirit. Help us each to listen politely when someone else is sharing their point of view. Help us to work as a unified team in combining ideas for a great outcome. Help us to work as a whole rather than as individuals trying to promote their own agendas. May we have a spirit of camaraderie in this room and work together in our shared mission. Amen.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you could get a roll call, please, and I'll get that at the end.
Okay. Mr. Hess? Present. Mr. Tholen? Mrs. Polk? Sorry.
Present.
Mr. Snipes? Mr. Seroy? Present. Mr. Lear? Present. Mrs. Weber? Present. Mrs. Peters? Mr. Payton? Present. Mrs. Parker? Present. Mr. Kinzinger? Present. Mr. Fairfield? Present. Mr. Carrico? Mr. Eckhoff? Present. Mr. Smith from Salina? Mr. Swanson? Present. Mr. Featherling? Present. Mr. Dunhill? Present. Mr. Miller? Present. Mr. Long? Present. Mr. Kirkstra? Present. Mr. Hunter? Present. Ms. Bryan? Mr. Collins? Present. Ms. Hudson? Present. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais? Present. Mr. Alexander Hildebrand? Present. Mr. Wheeler?
Present. We have a quorum. Can I get a motion from somebody to allow Dr. Polk to be present via Zoom at this meeting and all committee meetings as well? We'll go with Mr. Hunter, Mr. Long with a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Welcome to the meeting, Ms. Polk.
Thank you.
We'll have to do that again in any committee meeting, so we're good. I don't have any public commentary, any requests for public comment today, nor vacancy appointments. Got an announcement announcing the resignation of Daryl Smith from Kankakee County Board District 12. And I have a resolution declaring the vacancy in Kankakee County Board District 12. Is there a motion to approve the resolution? Mr. Long, Mr. Featherling with a second. Any comment? Let's do a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess? Aye. Mrs. Polk?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy? Aye. Mr. Lear? Aye. Mrs. Weber? Aye. Mr. Payton? Aye. Mrs. Parker? Aye. Mr. Kinzinger? Aye. Mr. Fairfield? Aye. Mr. Eckhoff? Aye. Mr. Swanson? Aye. Mr. Featherling? Aye. Mr. Dunhill? Aye. Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Long? Aye. Mr. Kirkstra? Aye. Mr. Hunter? Aye. Ms. Bryan? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Ms. Hudson? Aye. Mr. Smith? Aye. Mr. Alexander? Aye. Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. Motion carries. The minutes of the last meeting, June 8th, 2021, is there a motion there? Mr. Dunhill, second, Ms. Parker. Any comment? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Claims Committee reports.
Mr. Chairman, members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report. They have examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants. Total claimants of $5,865,929.83.
Alrighty, is there a motion on that?
Polk.
Mr. Eckhoff, second Ms. Polk. Roll call vote, please.
Getting there. Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hodder. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under department reports, if we could get those read in the record.
County Collector's Monthly Report for May 2021. Total cash and bank and investments, $5,317,868.08. Treasurer's Monthly Report for May 2021. Total cash and investments, $5,317,868.08. Coroner's Monthly Report for May. Total calls 114, coroner's cases 20, autopsy 16, toxicology 16, 2 donations, 1 indigent, 1 fetal, 44 hospice, 49 referrals, 63 cremations, 3 x-rays, 16 pending. An income summary report for the coroner for May of 2021, total of $3,957. Circuit Clerk Cash Book for month ending May 2021, total dispersed $345,818.15. Recorder's Monthly Report for May 2021, disbursement fees paid to the County Treasurer, $185,587.12. County Clerk Monthly Report for May 2021, total fees of $29,135.45. The County Clerk's 6-month report, total of $223,441.75. Animal Control Monthly Report for May 2021, total $31,449 in the IPTIP Building Fund, $7.89. Total animals handled, 98. Monthly Building Division Report for May 2021, 99 total permits, $56,033 in fees, total of $59,768. Monthly resolution list for July 2021, total to the county of $14,442.45.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to combine and approve on that? Mr. Lear, Mr. Fairfield with second. Is there any comment, questions? That'd be a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. On the consent agenda, is there anything that needs to be removed from the consent agenda today? I will ask one more time, is there anything to be removed and discussed separately? Mr. Kinzinger, which number?
272.
272. All righty. Any others? Hearing none, motion to combine and approve would be appropriate. Go with Mr. Swanson, second Mr. Long. If we can get those read in the record, please.
The appointment of Lori Gadboy to the Kankakee County Convention and Visitors Bureau. The reappointment of Joe Swanson to the University of Illinois Extension. The reappointment of Paul A. Kroll to the Pilot Township Fire Protection District. The reappointment of James Nichols to the Kankakee Township Fire Protection District. The reappointment of Antonio Carrico to the Kankakee County Board of Health. Declaration and disposal of mobile surplus equipment for the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department. Declaration and disposal of surplus telephone equipment for the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department. Declaration and disposal of surplus vehicles for the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department. Resolution and ordinance for the revision of altered speed zones on Warner Street and Fern Street in the Roma Road District. Authorizing the transfer of funds from fiscal year 2021, Fund Number 95, America Rescue Plan, Fund to fiscal year 2021, Fund number 098, American Rescue Fund, or Plan Fund, Lost Revenue. Authorizing the county board chairman to execute automated teller machine agreement with Cashworks Incorporated.
Thank you. That'll be a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under 272, if we get the title read in the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding an amendment to the Title VI policy and plan for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and related statutes plan.
All righty. Is there a motion on this first to start with? Motion to approve, second with Mr. Hunter. What was your question, sir?
This is a,
Kinzinger, sorry.
this is a Civil Rights Act, 1964. I read through it. What exactly are we changing in this amendment?
Ben, if you could, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you remember, in June of 2019, we passed the Civil Rights Act policies and plans for Title VI. And in that, the language read that we would not discriminate against, I'll be specific, because the state's being specific, race, color, national origin, sex, disability, or age. The three conditions covered under the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act are actually just race, color, and national origin. So IDOT has requested at the most recent review that we remove age, disability, and sex from our plan. We will not discriminate against those things as a transit provider, but they're just asking that we're congruent exactly with what's listed in the three items from Title VI.
And that's the change?
That's it? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, there's a request from IDOT. Any other questions? All righty, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. I apologize, Dan, I could have done voice vote on that.
Let that be the worst thing that happens.
So under PZA, if we can get 273 read into the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding ZBA case 21-04, rezoning from A1 Agriculture District to I2 General Industrial District in Section 35 of Manteno Township.
Do we have a motion on this one, Mr. Featherling? Yes. To approve?
Yes.
Second, Mr. Miller. All righty. Del, do you have any comment on this?
I can give you a little description of the situation here. St. George Ag Services owns the 20-acre piece of property just to the left of the red square on the map on the screen there. They operate a trucking business and trailer storage facility at that location. As you can see by the aerial photo, it's getting pretty full. They would like to expand their operation into the 20 acres that is outlined in red and use 10 of those acres for the expansion of their business. Their current facility is zoned I2 for storage of commercial vehicles. This parcel is zoned A1. They would like the zoning change to I2 to allow them to use that. They will not be accessing the property off of 7000 Road, but using their existing entrance through their current facility on 3000 East Road. I
have one quick question. Is that was that stipulated by ZBA that they could not use 7,000?
No,
With
since
pre-approve?
this is a rezoning and not a special use permit, you cannot put conditions on it.
Okay.
This is the testimony that the applicant gave.
Okay. Okay. If we could, on the record, Mr. Seroy? Yeah. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
I believe it's a secure lot, and that's why they use that drive. There's a,
Yes, there is there's a security
yeah.
at the front of that lot. It is secured, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Alrighty. Any other thoughts on this one, Mr. Snipes?
Yes, it appears as if their concern is that this highway, or at the interchange highway on I-57 is being built at 7,000 Road North. And so as a result, I guess, to accommodate that, they're trying to, that's what it says here in number 8, is that not what it says? It says the board finds that the highway interchange at I-57 being built at East 7,000 North Road will be completed, allowing for increased traffic into the area. The property to the west was already rezoned to 12. So it looks like because there's some variation there, they're asking, to be able to have the leeway to kind of adjust to this increased traffic that's going to be coming in and just not use 7,000 Road. So I'm not an objection of it, it's just that that's what I saw that's in the document.
No, that was just news to me because I hadn't heard of that project. Is that something I know that they were looking at the interchange in Will County that they had funded in a capital bill for the proposed airport, but I knew of no interchange in Kankakee. Mark, have you heard of anything like that? Okay. I don't know what this is about. It may be true, but we haven't heard about it.
The interchange is at 6,000 North.
Yeah.
That's probably a typo.
It's a typo?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so that's what I was reading in here. I didn't.
This finding of fact relates to the trend of development in the area.
Okay.
The interchange certainly is a change in trend in the area.
Okay. Thank you, though. Any other thoughts on this one? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, moving on. If we can get the title of 274, please, on the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding the authority for County Board Chairman to sign a service agreement between Kankakee County and Bruce Harrison Associates Incorporated to provide GIS services to Kankakee County.
Is there a motion on this one to start with, please? We'll go to Mr. Featherling, Mr. Fairfield with a second. For way of explanation, Dell, do you want to give a brief explanation?
Certainly. Our GIS department consists of 2 employees, myself and was Daniel Bishop. He departed from us about 2 weeks ago. Jeffrey Olson will be taking over his duties. But in the meantime, during this transition, we thought it was pertinent to have a backup, and that's what this agreement provides. We only pay if we need to use them. There is no retainer or anything of that nature. So if we were to run into an issue that we cannot resolve ourselves, we would call on them to help us.
It's our emergency fallback.
It's an emergency fallback.
Okay. Mr. Kinzinger?
Yeah, term of agreement, I assume this is for 1 year and can be modified for additional years.
I have to look here, the term.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, we couldn't hear that. What was the question?
This was Mike towards Mr. Oh, thank you, sir.
The term of the agreement, I assume that it terminates at 1 year and then can be extended, or does it go on forever?
I'm reading the last page here because I don't want to misrepresent that.
I'm not seeing a termination date.
Yeah, I don't see, there is no term, it's just a price agreement. So they're agreeing to the hourly rates.
So if we quit next month, we're okay?
Yeah, we're not, if we call them, we spend. If we don't call them, we don't spend.
Okay.
So it's just really a pricing arrangement and the scope of services that they do.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Hunter?
Got a question. This company's out of Batavia. Do we have a relationship, previous relationship with them?
I believe they built our GIS system.
That is correct.
That's correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me, well, that speaks to it.
No, you're correct. I mean, they
That's what I
know
want
us
to know.
intimately, I guess you could say.
What's the now? What's the gentleman with Kinky City? Zach. What's his last name?
Newton?
Is that his last name? Okay.
Zach Newton.
Do you ever call upon his expertise, assistance at all?
He sits on our GIS committee, and we do talk, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me. Any other questions? We are spending money, so we should get a, well, potentially, so we should get a roll call.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling. Mr. Donnell. Mr. Miller. Mr. Long. Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Under Finance, 275, if we get that read in the record, the title.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding authorizing the purchase of pole pad, iPad cases, and docking stations.
Is there a motion on that one to start with? Mr. Lear, second.
Polk.
Ms. Polk with a second. Is there any explanation needed on this one here? We are using ARPA funds because it's critical infrastructure, and we are able to do that per the law. So it's, in that case, that money could not have come at a better time, because the machines we had were not being supported anymore, the software. So I'm sure Dan would appreciate. Do you have any comment on this one?
I think you are waxing eloquently.
We have to have election machines. That's kind of goes with the territory. So if there's no questions, can we do roll call vote? We're there.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell. Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long. Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. And motion carries. I apologize. I explained them out of order because the poll pads and the election machines kind of go together. So the next item is the actual machines. The first item was the poll pads. I apologize for that.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, exactly. I ruined it. Under 276, can we at least get that read in the record?
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding authorizing purchase of voting and election solutions and authorizing the chairman to sign an agreement with Liberty Systems for yearly maintenance and purchases.
So this is the machines and the supplies. Mr. Hunter with the motion. Second, Mr. Eckhoff. Any questions, comments on this? Same finance deal. Paying for it outright, no interest or anything like that. So roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell. Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
And just to mention, Mr. Hunt, I'll get you in just a second, just to mention, normally those would have went through our subcommittee process for the ARPA funds, but we had to get them on order because with the state of parts and lead times and the world is upside down on when you're going to get stuff, we want to get them on order as soon as possible. So, Mr. Hunter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, upon receipt, will you do a demonstration for us?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
More demonstrations than you probably want to be part of.
So the next item, authorizing, 277, can we get the title read in the record, please?
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding authorizing the amendment of Resolution number 2021-05-11-245.
All righty. And is there a motion on this to start with? Mr. Hess, second, Mr. Long. Brief explanation, it was just an adjustment based on the need for the computers and the holders for the computers and the in-car, cameras and things like that. It was a price adjustment, but then we also got a grant to cover off most of, if not all of that, and then some. So in the end, we're going to spend less than we were to start with, but we have to go through this process. Any questions? Roll call vote.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Aye. Mr. Seroy. Aye. Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber. Aye. Mr. Payton. Aye. Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell. Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under 278, if we can get that read the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding transportation grant agreement between the state of Illinois, IDOT, and Kankakee County for fiscal year 2022.
Is there a motion on this one to start with? Mr. Hess, second.
Polk. Polk.
We'll go with Ms. Polk. Trying to think if there's anything. This is the one that we've already signed, I believe, correct? We had to sign this one, Ben, to get it because they needed it by the end of the month.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. By July 1st was the request from IDOT, so.
Okay. And we talked about it in committee, but we had to get it signed into them or else we would have been ineligible. So.
Yeah, and this is a recurring intergovernmental agreement that we always have with IDOT for the MPO.
Okay.
So.
Is there any more questions about that? It's just a formality now because we already had to send the paperwork in. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Openings. Would you like to announce some openings today?
One opening on the Raymond Drainage District, one opening on the Spring Creek Drainage District, one opening on the Canavan Drainage District, one opening on the Gar Creek Drainage District, one opening on the Little Beaver Special Drainage District, one opening on the McGillivray Special Drainage District, one opening on the Minnie Creek Drainage District, one opening on the Moments Yellowhead Drainage District Number 1, one opening on the Essex Township Fire Protection District, one opening on the Zoning Board of Appeals, must reside in the township, 3 openings on the Mantino Number 9 Drainage District, 6 openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission.
All righty, thank you. And so we're sending press releases out with all of these openings now on a regular basis. We're updating the county's website so these openings on all these commissions, committees are appearing right at the top of the current website, which is awful, to be honest. Our website is just awful and considered critical infrastructure. So it's my hope that, well, not hope, we're going to be asking the committee that is on reinvestment, the subcommittee, to invest in an update on this website. It's
Jasmine do that?
still living in 1997. So we need to get that at least up to maybe 99. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean. It needs help. It's not intuitive. It's hard to search. So that's one of Jasmine's projects as soon as we get through this committee stuff that we're working on. Mr. Lear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one opening in the Zoning Board of Appeals, it says must reside in township. That's a little unclear to me.
Yeah, the list of the townships was supposed to be in there. I apologize. You can't have more than one person per township on the ZBA. Do you remember those townships, Del? With we had some colds
We
at the
can have
office
some
last
sort of
week, and that one got
correction on
left
that.
off.
We currently have a member from Sumner Township, Mantino Township, Pilot Township, Limestone, Kankakee, and that's 5.
Hello?
The other one is Bourbonnais Township. I think it's Bourbonnais Township.
Yeah, it's we'll list it on the website, but yeah, so that was the only reason to let people know that there were certain things in there, and then I'll just say it, we dropped the ball. We didn't get it on the agenda right at the end of the week, so I don't mind admitting that. So beyond that, if you know anybody that's interested in one of those areas, it's a pretty important committee. of public input and vetting of these types of projects and planning things like solar farms, wind farms, all these rezonings, any changes to the code, the county code, not the mechanical contractors code that goes through the board of review, I believe, but those types of things.
That's St. Anne Township, not Bourbonnais.
St. Anne?
Yes.
Okay, so that's our current members you listed. Okay. All right, moving on. New business. Is there any new business? Mr. Hunter?
It's not necessarily new business, but could you send with the cover letter amendment 272 to the Kinky County NAACP attention, Theodis Pace? Also, the Hispanic Partnership.
272, just to make sure.
270, that's the one that Ron had a concern about the amendment. And that should, the Hispanic Partnership should be sent to the attention of Natalie Ojeda, Ojeda. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. And so, you know, they're in resolution form. I believe these are all posted on the websites too. I just want to make sure you knew that. Yeah, I know.
But it shows the interfacing with this board.
So let's see here. With that, old business. First, is there any old business before we get into the next item? All right, just a brief announcement before we go into the other business that we have here is a week from yesterday, which is next Monday, we'll start our subcommittee meetings. In your packet is all of the times for the committees everybody is on. We're hard stopping these at an hour. So, you know, if we have to suspend, we'll just, I can't remember the correct motion. I have it written down upstairs, but there's a way you don't adjourn the meeting. You just kind of suspend the meeting. So you don't, everything carries over to the next one. So
You
don't have to-
recess.
Yeah, it's a recess, I believe.
Right.
We'll make sure it's there. He's usually my parliamentarian, but Steve's got street cred too in this area. so.
I thought Ron was.
But that all starts, we're also looking, the press release went out, hopefully it'll make the paper, that we're looking for subject matter experts in a lot of these areas, people in the community. We have workforce professionals from KCC and the Workforce Board, and Mr. Pace is on our Workforce Subcommittee. If there's business people that could put particular input into certain things on our Business Subcommittee, or really anybody else. And if the public has a suggestion for a project, they can come in at public comment, make the suggestion, we'll put it on the big board. It'll be up to the subcommittees, then the executive committee, then the finance committee to rank and fund these and prioritize these. So everybody won't get their projects funded, but that's just the nature of the process. But everybody's voice is going to be heard. It'll all make the board, unless it's immediately not allowed by the law. Then we will have to call that out and make sure that, you know, we're not going to waste anybody's time saying that's not allowed use of the money. But beyond that, we're looking for all the input we possibly can. There'll be a lot of hard decisions coming up. We don't want to tax everybody's time. That's why I came up with the Monday thing. So you can always predict every couple of weeks that there'll be you'll have your meeting or two, as in the case of some people. But you can come to any of them. You can have input into any part of this process. So more to come on this. Once we start these meetings, it'll become clear what we're doing. So beyond that, now let's talk about.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to reaffirm what the chairman has indicated, that, he indicated that if you know people with certain expertise, community people, professionals, et cetera, who have expertise in those particular areas in which the money is going to be allocated. Additionally, too, if I'm sure the chairman is amenable to any other recommendations that maybe not be reflected in the documents that have been prepared. Not everybody's a Mensa, but I think that there may be something we were overlooked, but bring that forward to the chairman. Additionally, I take my hat off to the chairman in terms of interfacing with the underserved communities that historically have not been involved in the process. In fact, Mr. Pace and I had a discussion about that in terms of previous administrations, in terms of how this particular administration has been open in terms of holding meetings with, as I said, underserved and amenable to recommendations and comments. The chairman has explained thoroughly at each point in terms of what is transpiring regarding the guidelines and providing documentation to those communities and those stakeholders. And I just want to say we should feel positive about how open the process has been, and that the county administration, and you guys are part of it, have been open to suggestions, comments, additions, amendments that might be germane to the whole process.
Thank you. Mr. Snipes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this is dealing with the funding that we are asking the input of. I just want to be clear. Are we directing this in the non-incorporated areas because the incorporated areas have received their share of the funding?
So I have to answer that yes and no. We're focusing on the unincorporated areas, but we're purposefully reaching out to the municipalities to see where there's a synergy between what they're talking about and what we're talking about. And then pooling resources to target things that impact the rural and municipal areas. So, you know, there's things that impact county government, county resources, funding, institutions, departments that also impact municipal governments. So if we can figure out where those synergies are as part of this process, and that's part of Jasmine's job as well, is to make sure we have that open line of communication so we can look for those, because then our money goes further together and the impact goes further. And, you know, I don't see us repairing roads in the city of Kankakee, okay? Which seems to be a popular thing for us to do these days. But what we will is look for those ways that we can impact public safety, other types of services that reduce the tax burden on county residents as a whole, and reliance on our, which is mainly our public safety systems. I think that's a logical place to look for a partner with Kankakee, because that's a large percentage of where our cost comes from, both in human and financial capital. Does that make sense? So we are looking for those partnerships, whether it's here, whether it's Hopkins Park, whether it's well, broadband for the whole rural county. It's not just Hopkins Park, but there's places elsewhere, Altorf, Herscher, Essex, that they don't have broadband. So we should be looking, what can we do all over the place? Make sense? Okay. Any other thoughts on this? And believe me, this is just the start. I mean, it's backwards if you think about it. Usually you identify a project, then you have to go chase the money. Well, now we got the money, now we're chasing the projects. And it's kind of dangerous if you think about it, because everything sounds good when you got a bunch of money. It's like going shopping, grocery shopping when you're hungry. You know, so we want to make sure that what we do has a long-term impact rather than just throw money out the window. Does that make sense? There has to be a structure, there has to be a policy, there has to be a ranking, and we have to get input from everybody that's out there. So it's just a start, marathon, not a sprint. But by the way, I do want to say this, there are going to be some sprint things that, you know, because there are some people still hurting from the pandemic. We have to address some things up front, and those will get fleshed out hopefully in the first month of meetings. Okay, moving on, unless there's no more old business, anything?
Andy,
Yes, Dr. Pope.
I want to know, will I ever get to have my red tie affair at the courthouse?
You know, I will ask the chief judge when I see him. You know, I think they've relaxed everything, and since we have addressed the date certain ADA things at the courthouse, the things that had to be done by a certain day, that the Attorney General was going to sue us over, if you may remember that. We got that done, but we still have other ADA things to do in the courthouse that are not date certain that we have to address, like compact offices, people too close together, things like that. But what Dr. Polk is talking about is like a community event at the courthouse to kind of show off what we did during the year of COVID, because people don't really realize how much work we did in the courthouse with grant money, other types of funding that wasn't from the local taxpayers. And we have another round getting ready to go. We got a $400,000 grant from or allocation from the state of Illinois to redo the basement, the jury assembly room, create some offices down there, a couple more bathrooms to make them more functional, not just for today, but for the next 25 years. So those are the types of decisions we're making right now, so we don't have to spend our local taxpayers' money on things that we are mandated to do by the state of Illinois, the Attorney General, and really what's right. People with disabilities should be able to work in the courthouse, not just attend or sit on a jury or those types of things. Or to be a judge, to be honest. So thank you for asking. Soon, and I will ask the Chief Judge if he's comfortable doing something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, the next item came up last week because it came up last week. And just out of the blue, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife released their land protection plan, which was, and Mr. Miller could explain this a lot better, but it's the linchpin that allows for the establishment of the refuge. It is the one thing that they are legally left to required to do in order to establish the refuge in the Moments area. It's really, I don't know, say a third of eastern Will County, Kankakee County. Am I correct in that? It's a big piece of land. Yeah. So we were part of this about 3 years ago when we were talking with our Congress people, our senators, all of our local constituents. Those who were on the board in 2016 remember this. There's people that are very actively involved in conversation that were part of the board then and that are now, that are very concerned about the way that this was being handled back then in 2016. Well, now it's back, and it's back funded with a $4 million land sale. Before they didn't have any money. Now they've got about $4 million that has to be spent in Kankakee County on more land acquisition. So it is a real thing now, as far as, and it was real back then, but now it's the full court press is on. So if I kind of prepared some things in your packet of where this stood back in 2016. Some of these numbers need to be updated. Things don't get less expensive, they usually get more expensive. So the impact of this, I just wanted to run through it a little bit, and then Mr. Miller has some things from the farming side of it and some other aspects that I think the board should hear as well. And then obviously questions and discussion. So the first item was there are concerns with the process of how the refuge has been established without an updated environmental assessment study. The EA is what they're called, were released in August of '99, and it's obviously 20 years old. The river has changed in the last 20 years, and we can all see it with our very own eyes. It's not the same river that it was 20 years ago because we have so much increased rainfall and so much increased sediment load that what we have is the result of what has happened in Indiana over the past 100 years. It's here, and frankly, it's all the way to the locks in the Illinois River. So it's progressed exponentially over the years, and the Iroquois has exacerbated the situation downstream. But we're talking about just that area from the state line to Moments right now. And then the other part of this is on the map. Could we zoom in a little bit so I can show the board just from the top of it to the bottom? So if you see, yeah, the bottom, they've established the 66 acres down here is established as the Kankakee National Wildlife Refuge, correct, Chad? That's already established, and it's way down there just south of the Kankakee County line. It's a small footprint, highly unmanaged. I could just say unmanaged. But the full footprint, you could zoom back out a little bit, is this whole area. And including what is up to Moments. If we could zoom in on that top part. I want the public to understand this. You see Hopkins Park, first of all, down on the bottom. If you could just scroll up just a hair. I want first go, yeah, the other. Yeah, other up, sorry. The Hopkins Park is in that footprint with critical infrastructure in that footprint. And amazingly, a natural gas line going through that footprint. There are those of us who think that this is no coincidence this has shown up again.
Right.
And I'm not saying anything, but I'm not saying anything, because this has all become, when you look at this land protection plan, I don't want to say it's thrown together, but it is kind of half-baked. And that's from a conservation side of things as well. So I just wanted to show the board what this footprint is and how massive it is and how much land it takes off the tax rolls. There's a cost for this. The feds aren't paying for it. Taxpayers are in this county, or they lose what those taxes pay for. So we'll get to that in a second. Additional study is required to access the impact of no sedimentation mediation in the footprint of this massive project. It's different now, and they need to do another environmental study on what this is going to do before they even start moving forward on this. There have been changes in populations, residential areas, agricultural practices, land use, blah, all that. It needs an environmental assessment that is relative today and relevant today. The land protection plan just released, question mark. Are we getting infrastructure into the area that supports community growth and economic development? U.S. Fish and Wildlife releases the half-baked LPP, land protection plan, because that's what I see. When you go to their website, that's what you see. It looks good. It's really good propaganda. But as I said, it's a great idea, the conservation area, if you don't live there. If you're not from here, if you're not being impacted by your land being devalued because it's now part of or next to a new marsh, one that may be reformed from the old Grand Kankakee marsh, but as we'll see later, they're not addressing that where that actually was in Indiana. They're just doing it on the Illinois side. So we'll get to that in a minute. So what's the role, what role is the Nature Conservancy and the Field Museum played in all of this? I think that's a question that should be asked, because they've been the big lobbyers for this situation out there, against the will of the people who live there, mind you. And I would say not everybody, but vast majority, at least 85% documented. So the timing of this is a rush plan. Obviously, it's no coincidence. The 90s proposal included large areas of Indiana. The focus area this time, areas do not include any of those areas in Indiana. Why is that? So if we could you throw up the Grand Kankakee Marsh? I just wanted a little comparison. You see where this is now. The old marsh, it's basically the footprint is where the old marsh is. Well, what about the rest of it in Indiana? All of that has been substantially changed, and it's basically a straight ditch that's been dug. There's no more marsh there. So what do you do when you're shooting water and sediment load down a ditch into Illinois, which if it goes unmanaged much longer, it's like a cork. It bottles everything up and shoves it back into Indiana. We formed this Kankakee and Yellow River Basin Commission to help address the sediment load and build the banks back up to stop the sediment from coming down, so then Illinois could get the sand out of the way. Well, now, if the Fish and Wildlife owns both sides of that river, they don't let you have access to dredge anything out of there. They don't give you access for your equipment. That's not me saying that, that's history. The federal government blocks you out of access to these lands. That's the history. It's not me making it up. Chad can attest to this. They've gone around and gone to these different places. So it's really important to note that I love that idea. Why don't we talk about that? If you want to do something, restore the marshland and the meanders back in the river. Just don't make us pay for what they did to us 100 years ago. But don't, as they say, half-baked. I'm not going to use the other word, a plan and just shove it on the Illinois side of the border, where we have to deal with the loss of revenue and all of the problems that are associated with that. So an effort involving the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, other outsiders, the Nature Conservancy and Field Museum, and a small group of individuals not opposed to the refuge created a sustainability plan. That paragraph basically says they created a plan, and 80%, or most of the people that were on this, if not all of the people, were not from the area. If you disagreed with it, then they didn't make you part of developing a sustainability plan. Mayor of Hopkins Park wasn't included. The people in the area of Pembroke Township weren't included, except for a few select folks. That's a big problem. So if you had a dissenting voice, you couldn't be part of the process. Doesn't seem very transparent to me. Sounds like something's being shoved down our throats. The size of the focus area in Kankakee County is 18,000 acres over 28 square miles, which is equal to 4.15% of our county's total land. I apologize. It's staggering. The 18,000 acres includes 2.9% of Kankakee County's farmland. This means that Kankakee County could lose over $43.6 million in economic output from agriculture annually. That also translates into a loss of 124 jobs in our community. There's no way any economic development or tourism related to a refuge could make up for that annual loss. There's just absolutely no way. There's not enough draw for people to come and sit and watch what is arguably some of the most beautiful land around. And to experience it, guess what? We can do that today without the federal government. So I think we're doing all right managing it ourselves and the people that live there. The Momence Township Assessor conducted a study showing the property in the Momence focus area generates $1.2 million in property taxes annually. Of that total, $800,000 goes to the Momence School District annually, every year. If those funds are removed from the, and that's just in the footprint, okay? So that's just not total, that's in the footprint of what you lose. If those funds are removed from the school's budgeted, it'd be nearly impossible to continue functioning. What what happens is they readjust the levy, and those that are paying property taxes pick up that extra $1.2 million. So good luck, Momence residents and property owners. That's awful to do that, or they have to slash the budget, and then it's awful for the kids who may not have, however they figure out how to mitigate those cost losses within the Momence School District. With 68% of Pembroke Township being in agriculture production, over $403,000 in property taxes was payable in 2020. Removing 40% of the farmland brings it down to about $161,000. It's not, doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's a whole lot for the Hopkins Park School District out there. I mean, it's a big chunk. Yeah. It's who's already dealing with not a lot of revenue in the first place. So, you know, we can guesstimate on what the impacts are going to be, but they're not going to be positive to the schools and the residents in that area. This is a big one, and when I talk about propaganda, this is where this starts to fall. The 1935 Refuge Revenue Sharing Payment Act basically said that 0.75% of the assessed value of the property is going to be paid by the federal government. 0.75%. So they're taking a very small sliver of what the school districts and municipalities collected in property taxes and say they're going to pay 0.75%. Okay, well, first of all, they don't make the payments. That is documented over history. They don't make those payments. They don't fund it. It's all subject to funding, and they never have funded it. Well, I can't say never, but very rarely have funded it. But then also, what happens when the property is now wetland instead of a house? The assessed value goes down, so you're still getting even a lower fraction of what it's worth. I'm just trying to put some reality into this for people so they understand this is not just a feel-good hunting reserve and all that stuff, which we all like. This has a real impact. This isn't like John Muir sitting there on the rim of the Grand Canyon saying this needs to be a national park. This is not building a community, this is destroying one. So I already talked about the sand mitigation. It's impossible to access the river when the feds own both sides of it. You can't get the dredging equipment. What if the log jams are on the other side of the state line bridge and we can't get them out of there? I mean, that's a huge problem. Right now, we're working with Indiana and they're getting the log jams out of there, and they even pluck some out of our side for us. That's not going to happen anymore. And if you know that area, it's a problem. The infrastructure transportation improvements near an established refuge would be almost impossible to carry out. Many times, if not all times, they don't allow access to the ditches if they're on their side of the center line. And Chad has seen that firsthand as he's taken trips around. So you've seen it? The tile. Yeah, all the tiles get smashed and broken, and they let the land go back to natural state, which in a perfect world, that should include that whole area. If you want to have the, 20 million waterfowl return and all that other stuff that was basically destroyed when they did this in the first place. Well, you can't fix the Illinois side and then have the other side be a straight ditch. I keep going back to that. It's not functional. So on November 2016, the board voted 20-0 to reaffirm their opposition to the Refuge. The City of Momence passed resolutions in 2017. Senator Hutchinson's issued letters opposing in 2018. Representative Parkhurst opposed in 2018 as well. Pembroke Township and the Village of Hopkins Park also opposed the Refuge. And furthermore, there were almost 1,500 individuals who circulated a petition and sent it to U.S. Fish and Wildlife in 2016. So with that, Chad, did I say anything wrong?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for covering all of that important information. Just to reiterate, the chief concerns loss of tax base. That shouldn't just concern residents on the eastern side of Kankakee County. It should concern everyone in Kankakee County, because this will severely disrupt the tax base for the entire county. It will also disrupt, as you said, the established drainage. The Kankakee River watershed extends farther than the borders of Kankakee County. And as you mentioned, if U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service acquires both sides of the Kankakee River from the City of Momence east to the state of Indiana line, that entire Kankakee River watershed in that area will cease to drain as it has been established currently. That'll impact residential areas, farmland areas. It'll further drive down property values and make land unfarmable. Along with that, as you mentioned, 2.9% of the Kankakee County's farmland could be removed from production. The economic output annually from Kankakee County agriculture is over $1.5 billion annually. Just a straight line calculation of removing 2.9% of that is $43.6 million lost annually to our economic output here in Kankakee County. That would be devastating. Loss of access to the Kankakee River is another chief concern. Access for recreation and also, as you mentioned, access for maintenance of the river. Another concern is fire suppression. What we've seen in refuge areas in other parts of the nation is that this refuge property is severely unmanaged. It grows up as scrub brush. What if there were to be a fire, a wildfire, a forest fire in those areas? Are our local fire departments equipped? Many of them are volunteer fire departments. Are they equipped to handle such a fire suppression issue, especially if there's any structures nearby, homes, schools? That is a great concern. Another one is, as you've heard, the community by and large does not want this federal project. Why should the federal government, deep in debt, spend our scarce federal taxpayer dollars on a project in our community that we do not want? I would put forth this idea: aren't there greater needs than to spend federal tax dollars on something that our community doesn't want? Another concern would be, what if this was to turn back into the Everglades of the North? It becomes a marsh, a swamp. Would the 100,000 residents who rely on potable water from the Kinky River, would that cease to be available? If this water becomes brackish swampland, would Aqua Illinois be able to draw clean potable water if that were to happen? Those are the chief concerns that I wanted to reiterate. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for putting this on the agenda and explaining this so well.
Thank you. Thank you. And just so we're clear, what I'm asking for with the reaffirmation of that resolution via vote here today would be able to, I could send the governor a letter asking him to sign the natural gas bill because that's still not signed. That's, I think, that is directly connected to this, in my opinion, and others. To go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge and voice opposition on behalf of the board, to speak for the board in that aspect, because their public comment period is over. I'm gonna got one more slide on that. Can we put that up there? I'm sorry, that might be a good idea to have that sitting up there for the public too. So, and then zoom out just a hair. I don't know if we can. Yeah, in the right-hand corner. Because I think there's some stuff at the bottom. Yeah. Out. Sorry. There we go. So we can submit those comments and then also send letters to the legislators on the board's behalf, because we want them to get back behind us, make sure Rob and Kelly's still with us, Congresswoman Kelly, make sure that, our senators have not been with us on this. They both have supported the refuge. So we'll see if they'll switch positions once we're able to, elucidate a little bit on that. So I don't know. Mr. Snipes, thank you. I will give you credit every time. So if there's any, let's questions, comments. I don't have every answer. Chad has a lot more than I do, but Mr. Hunter first.
Yeah, I'm going to ask for a roll call vote, which would, as opposed to just doing a voice vote on the resolution, which would show unanimous consent on this resolution. You have anybody got any problems with that?
Well, can we start with the motion to reaffirm and approve?
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Okay, and a second for Mr. Payton. Okay, now, yeah, we can do that, and if it's unanimous, then we could obviously stress that. Mr. Snipes.
Yeah, 3 questions. Could you go back to that, the former slide that you had with the line showing the one previously? Yes. If I'm not mistaken, this looks like it's going through the areas of like Route 114, 10 and 41, and I guess it's grabbing some of 17. And if that's true, and that's in moments, especially if it's on 114, then it directly affects our property because we're right on the river on this side of 114 and also on this side of 114. So it looks as if, and we're on the river, so if they, what I'm seeing in this Grand Kankakee Marsh, so that means we will be directly affected, and there is a lot of good land in moments, even though we're on the river, and I think the government bought up like 5 acres or whatever, but there's still 20 acres of our property on that side. I am, it raises your eyebrow and concern as to not only the economic base in Kankakee, but the aesthetic base of, because on that other side, the river, because of the flood, overfloods the property and made our property that we once farmed on this side, it was almost like inhabitable because of the flooding, when they had the sludge or whatever, and it backed up on the property. So I see the argument there firsthand. I would have to be in support of this, but also I would ask the question in paragraph 23 where it says, be it further resolved, down there it says, in that last sentence says, Kankakee County Board, Kankakee County, Illinois, to support the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Draft Environmental Assessment Alternative number 1, and then it says no action. What did that mean?
Take a look here.
It's paragraph 23, the one that says, be it further resolved, on page, I guess, 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
I can speak to that, Mr. Chairman.
Please. Thank you.
So when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducted their draft environmental assessment, they gave several options for the community to consider. One was moving forward with a varying degree of which ways to move forward. And one option was no action, no refuge, no moving forward.
Okay, that was it. Okay, and then in the last one, where it says the local agricultural community accomplishing conservative goals more harmonious with the citizens of Kankakee, that means that we did some type of hearings or whatever and got their input.
Well, they held hearings.
Okay.
And solicited input from the public. Back then, I was at a few of those.
Oh, okay.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
So it's actually recorded that all this was taking place. So when we state our opposition to this project, we do have that background information.
Well, from then, but the problem is that that other Word document. Sorry. Comments can be submitted in person at the open houses or electronically by emailing that r3planning@fws.gov with the correct subject line by July 30th. That's why we're doing this now, and I did not wait, because we had to get this approval so we can voice opposition or support, whatever. But if as a board we're going to do opposition, it needs to be done by the 30th. But tonight is the first meeting. Okay, they just launched the land protection plan, and then they shoved the public meetings down your throat less than like what, a week later, and they put it on their website, but there's no times. Is that intentional?
That's what I'm about to ask you. What's the time?
It will be 3:30 to 7 p.m.
Okay, but I mean,
days.
it's like if you look it up, you can't even tell what's going on. That kind of transparency wouldn't fly with this county. How's it going to fly with the federal government? So, so the 13th is in Pembroke Township, and tomorrow, the 14th, is Island Park in the West Pavilion near the playground in Moment. So, if you want to write something up and bring it there and drop it off, that's fine. Or you can go onto the webs, send an email to that R3 Planning, I believe. Can't really see well from here. But and I'm just asking the board for the authority to be able to voice that opposition at this point. So, any other thoughts, comments, Mr. Eckhoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You and Chad did a fantastic job with this presentation. You hit every point that I had. I read the 40-page document. It's all rosy and it looks great, but theoretically, at the end of the day, for our budget, it doesn't work for us. So,
sure.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm sorry about some of the typos in that. I typed this up last night and some this morning, so there was a few typos in my notes here, because literally we had to scramble. I mean, it was not, they didn't give us any time at all.
And also on top of that point, you brought up earlier on about how it bottlenecked the river. It wouldn't just affect Moment, it actually affects Aroma Park even more right now.
Yeah.
So that's something to go ahead and consider even further.
Right. And it's part of what's going on with the way the river's flowing these days is there's so many sand dams throughout Indiana, and as you get into Illinois, they say Illinois is the natural state of the river. It hasn't been that natural state for 100 years since they dug the ditch in Indiana. It has changed, and now it's even changing exponentially as you get to that point. And so when these sand, really dams that are set up along the river, the water builds up and then all of a sudden it pushes through and then it launches large amounts of sand down the river now. That's what you're seeing, like when you saw the flood events and across from Riverside over here on Kennedy Drive, you'll see the sand dunes that appear. Well, that didn't happen 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You had a little bit of it, but you didn't get like we're getting now, and it's exponentially worse. It's because we're getting more rain and it's finally here. So to say that we're in the natural state here in Illinois is highly inaccurate. It's closer to the natural state than Indiana is, but we'll never get back there unless we can mitigate some of these issues with increased sediment load. So, Mr. Collins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback off of everything that I've heard here so far, and I very briefly got to touch on this with Mr. Eckhoff yesterday, landowners will always be the very best stewards of the land. Property rights are literally what our entire nation is founded off of. Especially when from an ideological standpoint you extend that to self-ownership. And when you point out all the hurdles that this would put in our way as far as infrastructure and improving a river on our side, it's important to step back and realize this entire problem was caused by government 100 years ago. And then when you look at the hurdles that it would put in front of us currently, when we are the people that live in this community and we know what's best for our own river, it's foolish to think that government would be the solution to government. So it's important that everybody loves the libertarian standpoint, but it's literally what our country was founded on. It would destroy so many things in our community at the sake, and it bounces out, or it banks off the fact of people saying, "Oh, it's for the environment." It's for the environment. We also use those things it's for the children. You got to raise money for the children. It's no different. My other point was that anytime your government is buying large swaths of land, that means they've taken too much money from their taxpayers. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, it says right there you can electronically by emailing. So anybody outside the state could be for it. They don't take the local community's input on what's going on.
Yeah, if you looked at the public comment from previously,
from
It's
2016.
East and West Coast,
Right.
almost exclusively major big cities that don't have conservation areas that wish they did. I can't fault them for that. Come live there.
I believe at the open house that they had, or the open forum that they had at the high school, the auditorium, I don't think there was one person in the audience that was for it. The only people that were for it were the panel that was up on the stage, and I believe Chad was there. So sure, there was not one local person that supported it.
Yeah.
I just like that.
Let me, first time. Let me get to everybody else first time, and then we'll come back around. Miss Bryant, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I gotta have like one of those auction placards. I'm sorry, I missed you over there. What do you got?
The problems that we're having, a lot of them stem from the straightness of the ditch in Indiana. Why are they not putting this $4 million in Indiana and putting simple curves in that ditch? Because that land is just as cheap as the land that we have.
Actually,
Cheaper.
we are in Indiana. They've funded the bank restorations and the sand mitigation projects. It's just the start of it. The river didn't wait for people. The river started to be a river again almost immediately, but now it's back to a channel meander. In the ditch, if you will, the river's now dug out a new meander and starting to be itself again. But we're focused on the Indiana side, because I'm on that commission, on retention, so letting the river flood where it should, because that's part of the natural cycle of a river, but just not where your wastewater plant is or where your hospital is. You know, making it out in the rural areas. You know, so they're just starting to slope this, because right now you've got almost like icebergs in long stretches of the river where it's sand calving into the river. So it is when a big flood event, which they're more frequent now, comes in, it's taking more sand with it. And the levees that were in Indiana to keep the sand out, if you will, or keep the water in the channel, were built with the spoils of the dredging. So it's basically every time it floods, it's pulling that back in the river too. So that's what they're addressing over there. They need us finally to keep the river moving, because they became a fishbowl. So it's with that whole mutual destruction thing, like the Cold War, you know, like we know that we got to do something about this. Well, they finally realized that, and we're working together. But now if U.S. Fish and Wildlife gets that, there's no more of that. So we weren't going to dredge here potentially until they stop the sand. It's a longer term project, because that would be just stupid money, right? Dredge it, well then more is going to come and you got to spend the money again. So you address it here and then you move into that. Well, when it's time for that, if this goes, we're not going to have it. So I just want to mention that they are funded by the state of Illinois. Senator Joyce got us $7 million to start addressing this on our side, to the point where we were considering some equipment to start addressing some of these things on our own. If that happens, we can't even get it in the river up there, because they won't let us in the river. And that's just not me saying it, that's their pattern. They have done this everywhere. They don't allow access to the refuge, to local infrastructure needs. So, Mr. Collins, second time, you got it.
Just to piggyback off of what you just said there, we can look across the country, especially in the last year, and see the quality of care that the government has given to the land that they already own. And that should be a huge, which is horrible. We look at the state of our national parks and our state parks, and then to think that the solution to be good stewards of our land would be to allow the government to control them. And you point out the contradiction of our own Senator Pat Joyce, who worked so hard to get us the grant money to improve this side of the river, for him to support this refuge, which would very likely impede our ability to act as our own stewards of our own land, is something that we should address with him.
Yeah, I don't know where he stands on this.
But I thought you said that our senators had both supported federal. Sorry.
Yeah.
Our state are very.
Yeah, our state. Yeah. I haven't spoken with Senator Joyce yet. I was going to do that as a result of this meeting.
Very good.
I kind of think I know where he's at. but I won't assume that until I ask him.
I don't see how anybody who lives in, and I also like to point out how fortunate we are on this board. I know several people in this room who absolutely love not only our community, but our natural resources and appreciate what we have here and have done lots of work. Our chairman in particular, who I've been paying attention to for years before I even considered running for this board, has been a champion of doing what's right for our area on a voluntary basis, and really evaluating what the future would bring for the improvements we can put in.
Thanks. This is just hopefully not the end of this, it's the start of it. At the very least, they need to do another environmental study, because it's not the same river that they faintly studied before. So do we have a motion and a second? It's been a while.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so can we do a roll call vote to see where we all stand on this? Thank you.
Thank you.
And an aye vote is to affirm the opposition.
Affirm 2016 and allow me to do those other things.
Okay. Mr. Hess.
Aye twice.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Thank you. And then just in case anyone out there is a conservationist, this resolution does reaffirm our commitment to conservation, but there has to be large parts of local input and control into that. We just can't be told what to do. So, all righty, does anybody want to stay any longer? Mr. Hess?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I think that speaks to that. Mr. Kirkster, do you have a second?
Second that.
All those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?